This is a TV version of a virtual novel that is mainly composed of artifact spirits and supplemented by the ultimate Class and Zhenhun Street. Chang Dan came to this divided world by chance. What will happen to him in this world? What troubles will his personality cause for the arrival of his journey? What kind of choices would he make, who originally knew something? Feilu Novel Network reminds you that this novel and its characters are purely fictional. If there are any similarities, they are purely coincidental and should not be imitated. Beginning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chang Dan grew up in an environment where his parents were not around and he was supervised by his older sister, who was the owner of a Chinese branch. And his parents are overseeing the headquarters overseas. Because their family is all Chinese, they want Chang Dan to stay in China with his sister to study. Although such a family often lacks the joy of being together, the frequent videos with his parents and the tolerance of his sister prevent him from becoming a stubborn child. On the contrary, he is a particularly low-key person. This year, Chang Dan has already entered the second year of high school. Because of his low profile and personality, almost no one in their school knows about their family's situation, perhaps only the teachers know. His relationship with his classmates is not far or close, only to the point of greeting each other when they meet, and he even runs to school every day without much interaction with other people's lives. Chang Dan enjoys watching science fiction TV dramas, especially Qiling and Zhenhun Street. He often imagines that he can possess some incredible abilities compared to those on TV. But he was just thinking about it, he didn't want to experience the feeling of a near death, and besides, he couldn't possibly possess that magical power. But he didn't even realize that all the fantasies he was thinking of now would eventually turn into reality. That day, he returned home from school as usual, greeted his sister, went upstairs to his room, closed the door, and played games with his netizens in front of his computer. But this time the game was played extra late, and by the time it was finished, it was already past 2 a.m. the next morning. After seeing the watch, Chang Dan realized that he was particularly tired and quickly went to bed thinking that he had to attend class tomorrow. He slept very fast, so fast that he was still awake in the previous second and fell asleep in the next second. And this time, Chang Dan, who originally didn't dream while sleeping, had a very strange dream. In the dream, he saw a large stone statue of Qin Shi Huang. Before he could carefully examine the statue, it began to emit a golden light, and then he heard a voice calling him. A voice of Chang Dan and Chang Dan came from above and in front of him. Chang Dan followed the sound and saw that the golden light was gradually fading but did not disappear. It turned out that the stone statue of Qin Shi Huang had a completely new face. It looked expressionlessly at Chang Dan but said, "On the ordinary road, there are dangers everywhere. The energy is different, but it is the same. The 3 lifetimes are unified, different time and space. The 7 radiant artifacts spirit becomes eternal. Chang Dan, go and complete your mission." After speaking, the golden light around it disappeared, and the stone statue also disappeared. After Chang Dan watched the golden light disappear, he waited for a long time in the darkness until he heard his name ring around. In reality, he was awakened and looked around at his sister's tense expression and constantly closing and opening lips. He just realized that he was not lying in his own bed, but in a hospital bed. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. How could I have slept for so long? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chang Dan, are you okay? He finally understood his sister's last words. I'm fine, Chang Dan replied. It's okay. Do you know how long you slept? She reached out and hit him, feeling a bit angry. How long? Chang Dan looked at her hand gesture and remembered her habit of hitting him before, knowing that she had intended to hit his head. But I still instinctively asked back. Her assistant interjected, "Young master, you have been unconscious for 2 whole days and 1 night. I slept for so long. Chang Dan was secretly surprised and thought to himself, why did I just have such a short dream and sleep for so long? Then he looked at her sister and said, you didn't tell your parents, did you? I dare tell them about this. If you wake up for a while, give them a call. If you don't wake up again, I'm afraid I won't be able to keep it hidden, my sister suddenly remembered. I also took a good leave for you at school. How are you doing now? If you can't, you can sleep for a while, she continued. I have nothing left, you should hurry up. Chang Dan even stood up to indicate that he had no problem. Well, I'll leave 2 people for you. If you need anything, just call them. I'll hurry to the company first. You should stay in the hospital for an extra day to observe and be discharged tomorrow, his sister replied. Okay, Chang Dan knew he couldn't resist his sister, so he reluctantly agreed. After watching his sister leave, he asked the 2 of them to go out first, and then took out his phone to call his father, and there was another round of small talk. But through the conversation, Chang Dan also heard that they clearly did not know about his 2 days and 1 night coma, and only asked him what he did. These past few days have been so busy, Chang Dan casually found an excuse to evade and then hung up the phone after chatting a few more words. Then he asked the 2 people left behind by his sister to prepare meals for him. After dinner, because he was bored, he wanted to sleep for a while longer, but he couldn't sleep anymore. His mind was filled with the words spoken by the stone statue in his dream just now. What exactly did he mean? What do I need to do? Chang Dan became increasingly confused as he thought, and in the end, he could only calm his mind and let nature take its course. Then I fell asleep again. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. An overturned box. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, he didn't sleep for that long anymore and woke up earlier than before. He looked at his phone and it was 7:06. He called someone to help him with the discharge procedures and packed his things. He wanted to go home early and then go to school for classes. After all, hospitals are also too boring. In no time, the person who went to handle the discharge procedures returned. Chang Dan thought he could leave after completing the procedures, but was told that the doctors didn't start work until 8 o'clock, so the discharge procedures could be completed. He didn't want to trouble his sister and waited until 8 o'clock to be discharged from the hospital. After returning home, he also went upstairs to pick up his backpack and left. When he arrived at school, he was undoubtedly late, and the teacher didn't say much. After all, Chang Dan was on leave. Chang Dan, who had sat down in the classroom, had completely forgotten everything that had happened in his previous dream and tried his best to enter a state of learning. The morning class was quickly finished, and Chang Dan was very irritable because he hardly listened to what was being taught today, and his mind was almost blank and not in a state of mind. He walked out of school with this impatience towards his home. He never stays on campus at noon. After returning home, Chang Dan walked directly back to his room, and the sister who heard him enter stretched out her head and withdrew. He saw that Chang Dan was not in a good mood, and when Chang Dan returned to the house, he called the butler to ask him, "What's wrong?" The butler shook his head. After all, Chang Dan didn't say anything to her. Chang Dan returned to his room and saw a box with no labels or other information on it, just an ordinary yellow box. Chang Dan walked in and saw 10 test tubes and a relatively large bead inside. However, Chang Dan didn't pay attention to these things at the time and directly knocked over the yellow boxes that contained them. At the moment when the box was knocked over, he seemed to see a label on the test tube that seemed to have words on it. Looking at the box that was knocked over and the liquid flowing out from under it, Chang Dan knew in his heart that the test tube inside had broken. He was supposed to go up and take a look, but was suddenly attracted by the sound of the door opening. Watching my sister stand at the door. "What's wrong with you?" Sister asked after scanning my room with her eyes. "Not much, just a bit confused today." Chang Dan walked towards his bed, preparing to take a nap. Sister knew about Chang Dan's general situation at school, and based on his speculation that he had just returned from school, she said, "You can skip going to school this afternoon, and I'll take another leave for you." Upon hearing this sentence, Chang Dan felt much less irritable in his heart. He also knew that he would eventually take over the arrangements at home, but still wanted to play for a few more years. School was a very good reason, so he replied, "No need." And as he spoke, he was already lying in bed with his back to his sister and waving his hand. Sister saw this scene and left the room. She didn't have the urge to ask someone to help clean the yellow box that Chang Dan had knocked over. He doesn't like others to tamper with his things. Because he had someone clean his room once before, Chang Dan was very unhappy and said that no matter how messy the room was, he knew where his things were. Once he cleaned it, he couldn't find anything. Since then, almost no one else has entered his room, afraid that he won't be able to find anything to blame them. On the other hand, Chang Dan sighed, perhaps because he was tired. His sister had already fallen asleep within 5 seconds of leaving the room. However, I didn't pay attention to the disappearance of the liquid that had originally flowed out from under the box. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Box. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chang Dan woke up on time, feeling very hungry. It was only then that he remembered that he had forgotten to eat lunch due to his low mood at noon. The butler downstairs had already prepared food for him as instructed by his sister. Due to time constraints, he chose to ask the butler to prepare a car for his trip to school instead of walking as usual. This time, Chang Dan almost arrived late and walked into the classroom by ringing the bell for class. Then he quickly rushed to his seat, and when the teacher came in, he saw it but didn't say anything, and started the class on his own. Because the last class in the afternoon was physical education, most of the children who ran to school chose to take leave and go home to play. Chang Dan also came out of the school gate early like them, and he promised his friend Wang Yi to send a box over. But Chang Dan never expected that the box he gave Wang Yi would start his unique destiny. He originally planned to go home first and then help Wang Yi deliver the box, but he was afraid that he wouldn't want to come out as soon as he lay down at home, so he decided to go and deliver the box first. The delivery location is quite remote, with alleys extending in all directions, but fortunately, Wang Yi once brought him here, and he remembered the route he took that day and found the delivery location. The road that could have been reached in half an hour took over an hour to arrive. After handing over the gift to a young man in his 20s and 30s, he turned around and left. Because it took too long, he had to go home quickly. Chang Dan's pace did not slow down, and at the same time, he was complaining that he would never want to give people anything again in the future. But because he walked too fast and didn't recall the route he had taken before, he quickly got lost. And as he was about to turn back and find his way, he heard the sound of a fight. Chang Dan was very curious and quietly approached the source of the sound. In no time, he saw a group of black-clad men besieging a woman in an alley from afar. The woman's skills were excellent, and she knocked down 2 black-clothed men. For some reason, Chang Dan wanted to help that woman. Chang Dan thought to himself that there were too many people on the other side. If he also went in to help fight, he might have lost his life. He called the police, afraid that the woman might not be able to hold on and be arrested. What should he do? How about this? The woman struggled to resist attacks from all directions in the crowd of black clothes, and she also noticed that the opposing spiritual master did not show any nervousness, as if everything was as expected, which made her nervous. Do they have anyone else coming? She thought to herself, it seems we need to find a way to leave quickly. She had not yet taken action when she suddenly heard the sound of the police car alarm, which startled her heart. Although the black-clothed men were wearing masks, their movements clearly stopped. The leading man spoke in a very angry tone and ordered to withdraw all the black-clothed men before quickly leaving. Disappeared at the bend inside. They cannot reveal their identities. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. The feeling of Chang Dan and Chong Li. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. However, Chang Dan did not know the true reason for their departure, thinking that they were afraid of the police before leaving. He turned off the recording of the police car alarm on his phone. Arriving in front of the woman, she was turning her head from the direction where the man in black had disappeared. After seeing the woman's face, Chang Dan stared blankly at it, feeling like he had seen it somewhere before but couldn't remember it. The woman has a beautiful figure with huge breasts and a childlike appearance, wearing a long blue coat, always giving the impression of a sister with similar age differences. The woman was also surprised when she saw Chang Dan and was about to ask, "Who are you?" When she saw Chang Dan's naturally hanging phone, she immediately understood that there was no police officer at all, it was the sound he made with his phone. He is helping himself. Chang Dan stared at her for a moment before realizing that it was time to leave this place quickly. "So it's you, I just said how could there be police in this place?" Their figures appeared in the place where they disappeared just now, and the masked black-clothed person leading the way gritted his teeth and said, "Since you want to die, don't blame me." As he spoke, he stabbed at Chang Dan with a dagger in hand. His speed was extremely fast, so fast that Chang Dan couldn't react in time. But the woman behind him arrived in front of him at some point, kicked away the leader's dagger, and repelled him. The leader showed a shallow smile at the corner of his mouth as he wrestled with the woman, but when they parted again, neither of them took advantage. However, the masked man in black had a relaxed expression and a soft gaze, but it didn't reach the bottom of his eyes, but the woman's expression was very serious, with a murderous intent in her eyes to shatter the man in front of him. The people behind him are all in place. Chang Dan saw that the number of people in black was significantly higher than just now, and knew that they had come prepared. Although Chang Dan didn't know this woman, she gave herself a very familiar feeling. So when she separated from the leader in black, Chang Dan held one in front of the woman and said, "Go ahead and report to the police. I'll hold on here." After speaking, he grabbed a stick and hit the masked man. The woman behind her not only didn't leave, but also looked at the rushing figure with a moved expression, as if recalling past events. She murmured, "They are all fools." Chang Dan had never learned martial arts, and without any surprise, he hit a few times before seeing the dagger from the opposite side piercing his eyes. He was suddenly startled. Then he arrived at another space of his consciousness, looking around, where there were scattered fragments of mirror-like surfaces. I don't know when the woman stood in front of him and said, "Why did you choose to help me? Is it worth sacrificing your life to help me?" Chang Dan instinctively replied, "Because of a feeling, I don't know if I have a very familiar feeling with you. I didn't think too much, just felt like you couldn't die." The woman seemed to have remembered something again, and he also had an answer in his heart. He said to Chang Dan, "He is really like him. I hope you can also find the familiar place on me. By the way, remember my name. Yen Gun Chongli. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. The first battle of cooperation with Chongli. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Suddenly, the space disappeared and a dagger came randomly. Chang Dan instinctively used his spear to shoot the dagger and force his opponent back. He stood in place, but the woman behind him disappeared. Holding a long spear that appeared in his hand at an unknown time. The gun body is cyan black, 2 meters long, and the tip of the gun has a flame color of orange-yellow mixed with bright red. The connection between the gun tip and the gun god is in the shape of a dragon head, with a suanio, a black swallow, a totem of the state of Zhao, carved on it. The gun body has turtle shell texture. The overall color feels like fire in the ice, cold on the outside and hot on the inside. The gun head is extremely sharp and sturdy, and a single shot in the hand feels like it can pierce through everything in the world. Chang Dan looked at the long spear in his hand and felt a bitter feeling in his heart. He recognized the spear in his hand, the strongest spear of the 7 Huangqi spirit, the flame spear heavily. He entered the virtual world of the people he was most familiar with. At the same time, they will be involved in the dispute between the Tian Guild and the 9 ministers. The man across from him was also surprised, not expecting that Gun Chongli would enter into a contract with this person who looked less than 20. But he quickly realized it. But Chang Dan didn't have time to think so much, because the man across from him had already attacked again, and the two of them were fighting together. Because the spirit of the man in black is just a ghost-level spirit, and Chongli has released a powerful force because he just signed a contract. So, after a few moves, Black E was injured by Chang Dan and fell to one side of the wall. The men in black rushed forward when they saw him injured. A few minutes later, the bodies of the men in black minions lay on the ground, all with fatal injuries. Chang Dan stabbed the last minion to death with his long spear and walked towards the leader. The leader just stood up and glanced at the dead subordinates on the ground. Knowing that he was not Chang Dan's opponent, he released his sword energy with a dagger and turned around to run. After blocking the sword energy, Chang Dan realized that it was just an empty move. It was discovered that the man in black was no longer in his original position and was about to turn through that alley. Chang Dan knew he couldn't escape enough. Otherwise, the fact that they own the 7 Huang artifacts will definitely be immediately known by the 9 ministers and the Heavenly Union. He demonstrated the ability of gravity for the first time. The other party resisted and was about to kneel due to defeat. Just as he was about to kneel, Chang Dan's long spear flew out and happened to pierce the man in black in the chest. He leaned backwards and then lay on the ground. Chang Dan walked over and pulled out his long gun, took the dagger from his black-clothed man's hand, and walked out of the alley without looking back. This battle increased the fit between Chongli and him to 7%. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. The Choice of Chongli, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This time, Chang Dan was different from usual. He didn't enter the house through the main door, but instead used the power of gravity from Chongli to enter through the window. Because the battle just now stained his body with a lot of blood. Fortunately, his room has a separate bathroom, so he can naturally take a shower. He placed his spear in the corner of the wall parallel to the door, and his dagger casually placed it on the table. Then he walked into the bathroom, and the sound of splashing water immediately followed. After Chang Dan finished washing, he had already changed into a new outfit. He saw it as soon as he came out. The box that should have been on the ground was placed on the table, and at some point, Chongli transformed into a human form and stood next to the table. Holding a test tube in hand, it was filled with white liquid rolling inside. Chongli's expression was very strange. Chongli saw him come out and looked at him seriously. Are you a descendant of the Su family in Wuyang? Chang Dan saw the words, Qi Ling repair liquid on the test tube and knew why she asked so. No, I'm just a college student running on campus. Chang Dan answered her question, but also kept some things hidden from her. I've heard about Qi Ling before, but seeing you today seems like it's true. As for the thing in your hand, I don't know how it got to me. Chongli furrowed his brows and remained silent. Obviously, there is no doubt about Chang Dan's words, but it cannot be refuted. I only have a general understanding of your spirit tools, but I am not aware of the details and do not want to delve deeper. I know you should have signed a contract with me, but I do not want to enter a dangerous life of fighting and killing. I just want to live a peaceful and indifferent life, Chang Dan said of himself before discussing Chongli's choice. You can leave if you have something to do, so I won't take care of you, and you don't bring danger to me. You can also live with me and live an ordinary life. That way, I will improve our fit, enhance our strength, and try to protect you from being taken away by others. I won't help you with anything about the spirit of the weapon, but except for the spirit of the weapon, I will do my best to help you achieve anything you want. I value Li and still don't say a word, burying my head in thought. He continued, you can think about it with me for a night and reply to me tomorrow. Chongli nodded, looked at what was in his hand, hesitated for a moment, and then asked Chang Dan, can you give me one of these? Chang Dan glanced at him and said, yes, before leaving his room. He knew why Chongli wanted this because her soul stone had cracked. Chang Dan told the butler and his sister that he wanted Chongli to stay at home. The butler didn't have any objections, but my sister kept asking for a long time, such as whether Chongli is your girlfriend. Is she also a student? It's like parents nagging their children, and Chang Dan feels helpless about it. Then he introduced his sister and butler to Chongli. This is my sister Chang Wan, and this is our butler. Chongli greeted them one by one, had a meal, had a chat, and then was taken by the butler to the room arranged for her. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. The power of weapon spirit repair liquid. You are listening at novel full.audio. After returning to the room, Chongli did not lie down to sleep, but instead sat down by the window. Looking at the dimly lit scenery outside, I fell into contemplation. Guessing where Mo Changhong actually went. If he is imprisoned in Zheqing, will there be any danger if his contract with him is terminated? Remembering Chang Dan's attitude, he would definitely not help save Changhong. But he also has his own uniqueness. For example, does he seem to know the existence of artifact spirits and imperial spirit masters? For example, the spirit repair liquid on oneself. Qi Ling repair liquid. She took out the test tube from her own body, looked at the words on it, self-deprecating, opened the bottle cap, and poured a little into her hand. As a result, the liquid seemed to have been summoned and all surged onto her body. With a heavy jump, the test tube fell to the ground in response. Immediately after, she saw all the transparent liquid in the test tube surging onto her, and her body emitted a red light. Then, she felt as if her soul stone had been intact as before, and her strength had also been enhanced. It seems like I have reached the level of a divine artifact spirit, she was shocked. Chang Dan chatted with his sister for a while and then returned to his room. The first thing he did when he went back was to look at the yellow box. One bottle of the test tube inside was taken away by Chongli, and 7 bottles were full. There were also 2 bottles that were already broken, and the liquid was no longer visible. Only the traces of water on the box indicated that they had existed before, which made him quite regretful. He didn't expect that the test tube would contain Qi Ling repair liquid. And I don't know what that bead is either. But it should also be something good. He put away the box before lying in bed and starting to sleep. He had not yet fallen asleep when suddenly a powerful force came from his body, and he also sensed that this force came from Chongli. So he got out of bed and headed straight to Chongli's room without even putting on his shoes. He arrived at the door of Zhongli's room, opened it, and wrapped herself in it with a red light all over her body. After a while, the red light dissipated, and Chongli looked at his hands with an incredulous expression on his face. You are. Chang Dan's voice rang out abruptly, pulling back Chongli's thoughts. Chongli then turned his head and looked at his hand in shock, murmuring, how could that be? Not only did it repair my damaged soul stone, but it also made my abilities stronger. How could this be? Chang Dan let out another cry before completely pulling Chongli's thoughts back. How did you do it? No, how did you get this thing? Chongli pointed to the empty test tube on the ground and asked in surprise. Chang Dan, who had contracted with her, clearly felt that Chongli was different from before, and his strength was even stronger than before. Plus her murmuring words and her questions just now. Chang Dan also understood what had happened. I told you before, didn't I? I don't know how they got to my room. Go to bed early and remember to give me the answer tomorrow. Good night. After Chang Dan finished speaking, he didn't wait for Chong Li's answer and immediately closed the door. Now he doesn't know how to answer. Then, he went back to his own room to sleep. Only a bewildered expression remained on Chong Li's face. This night, for her. Destined to be difficult to sleep. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. The Choice of Zhong Li, 2. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. At the same time, the Heavenly Union also received news that Zhiqing's minions had been killed in an alley, including a ghost-level spirit master. Lin Qinyu, the chairman of the Tian Union, frowned slightly as he listened to the news. He also learned that these minions were killed by a gun. He thought of the flame spear Chongli in the Qi Huang artifact spirit and thought to himself, can it be her? At the same time, he also assigned tasks to the members of the Heavenly Union to try to find the user of this artifact spirit. Even if it's not a 7 Huang artifact, it should be an enemy of the 9 Qing. Absorbing it into the Heavenly Union is also a force. The next morning, Chang Dan got up at 7:16. He didn't go to wash up as usual, but went to Chongli's room first. I knocked on the door and immediately wanted to pull the door handle. He hasn't touched it yet, but the door is opened inside. Chongli looked at Chang Dan standing outside and asked him to come in and close the door. He was the first to say, I choose to stay. I understand your desire for a simple life, but I have already made a contract with you. So, I will not ask you to participate in the world of artifacts. But I have only one request. I want to take care of and help someone like before, and I hope you don't mind. In fact, besides having already signed a contract with Chang Dan, Zhong Li also thought of Chang Dan's uniqueness. She firmly believes that Chang Dan's life is far more simple than it is now, and even in the future, it will change. Even the current Chongli himself did not expect that Chang Dan's mission had an impact on the world. Chang Dan knew that the person Chongli was talking about was inexplicable, so he only said to Chongli, as long as you don't participate in the dispute between the 9 ministers and the Heavenly Union, you can do anything else. After having breakfast with Chongli, he went directly to school, and Chongli didn't know where he had gone again. It seems like he was looking for something inexplicable. After arriving at school, Chang Dan told Wang Yi about delivering things to him. Then there are daily essential courses. However, Chang Dan never expected that all the changes would happen today. The teacher told them about these school runners, because since the 3rd year of high school, in order to strengthen social relationships among all students need to move into the school. So, starting from now on, pay the accommodation fee. Regardless of whether you live or not, you must come to the school for your 3rd year of high school. This makes Chang Dan very depressed. He still prefers freedom, but now it seems impossible. At noon, when I got home, I talked to my sister, but she was very happy. Say something like, I can save you dim sum. Chang Dan was also very helpless. When I opened my room door, I suddenly remembered what to do with Chongli. Then I went to Chongli's room and when I entered, Chongli leaned against the window. I also have no thoughts on Chang Dan's question. Because she can't stay away from the user all the time, otherwise what difference would there be between her and Mo Changhong? She has an additional place to live but is not very familiar with people other than Chang Dan, we can't turn her into a spear and bring her to school. Finally, Chang Dan suggested that Zhongli join the school as a student. Although Chongli was unwilling, this seemed to be the best solution and could only be reluctantly agreed. But there's no way. I don't know why a glimmer of anticipation flashed in Chongli's heart. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th. Moving into school. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chang Dan entrusted his sister Chang Wan with a series of questions regarding entering the school with a heavy Li identity. My sister completed these tasks 2 days after attending regular school in Chang Dan. On the morning of the third day, Chang Dan and Zhong Li loaded their belongings that they had packed up last night into the car that took them to school. Of course, most of the things here are from Chang Dan, while there are hardly any from Zhong Li. To Chang Dan's surprise, while they were loading things onto the car, he saw a strange and familiar figure walking briskly in the distance. This accelerated the loading speed of Chang Dan. Zhong Li was startled by Chang Dan's sudden action, but she didn't ask much. The subordinates kept moving until they got on the car. At school, they each found their own dormitories to tidy up their things. Zhong Li's things are very simple. He put the quilt and mattress on the bed, grabbed a few clothes and put them in the cabinet, and then left to look for Chang Dan. Chang Dan spent more than 40 minutes waiting. When he went downstairs, Zhong Li had already been waiting for a long time. Because I moved into the school. So, they have half a day off and don't have to attend classes, they can walk around. This would allow Chang Dan and Zhong Li to take a good stroll around this school and familiarize themselves with the environment. Zhong Li looked wholeheartedly at the scenery of the surrounding schools, hoping that he would soon integrate into this new environment. Although there were times before when we lived in a whole new world. But he did not become one of them, let alone afraid to be noticed. Now she even has a feeling of forgetting her identity as a spirit and becoming a human. Chang Dan patiently accompanied her through the entire school, and even helped her tell the stories and functions of these places that he had heard before during his day studies. Looking at Zhong Li's expression of enjoyment, he increasingly felt that bringing Zhong Li to school should be the right thing. Good times are always brief. Zhong Li and Chang Dan finished visiting the school in a short while. But Chang Dan didn't take her back to the dormitory and instead took her to a deserted place. Zhong Li watched as Chang Dan brought her here instead of taking her back to the dormitory, knowing that he had something to say to herself. Her intuition told her that it was related to the matter of Qi Ling. As expected, when he arrived at a suitable place, Chang Dan spoke up, "Maybe we can go out recently, but don't go out anymore. When I was just loading a car at my doorstep, I saw a Ruofeng from the Tiangong Guild looking for someone, maybe. It's us. How could they come to us? It seems like we haven't done anything, right?" said Zhong Li with a disdainful expression. "I think it should be the 9 Qing minions and the eerie level spiritual master that you killed when you made a contract with me. They probably didn't know it was you and me, but they were against 9 Qing." Chang Dan suddenly thought of something. They should be trying to win over the Imperial Spirit Master who killed Zhuqing's subordinates. And if they alarmed the Heavenly Union, they should also have alarmed Zhuqing. After all, those people are Zhuqing's subordinates. Zhong Li's face darkened, thinking that what Chang Dan said was also very likely, and he agreed to Chang Dan. And he also told Chang Dan to quickly improve his fit with himself, only in this way can he protect himself. Chang Dan agreed. Chang Dan's conjecture is not wrong. The person in charge of Zhuqing had already sent someone to say that they must find this person before the Heavenly Union knew about it. Qingming outing and happy reading. Charge 100 and get 500 VIP coupons. Immediate recharge, activity period. April 4th to April 6th.